This is apropos. Well, French lawmakers this week passed legislation aimed at simplifying the return of artworks looted during the colonial era to their countries of origin. The state still has in its possession tens of thousands of such works and other prized artefacts that it looted from its colonial empire. With the details, here's Charlotte Lamb.
Looted by the French more than a century ago, this sacred talking drum returned to Ivory Coast in March. Previously on display in a Paris museum, it was the first artefact to be repatriated, with 147 more requested by Ivory Coast.
On a national level in Ivory Coast, this actually represents the national cause. It will certainly foster, or even strengthen, the very identity of the Ivorian people.
Back in 2017, newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron made a political promise to return artefacts taken by his nation during its colonial era.
I cannot accept that a large share of the cultural heritage of several African countries is in France. There are historical explanations for this, but there is no valid, lasting and unconditional justification.
France possesses thousands of these artefacts and has been flooded with requests from Algeria, Mali and Benin. On Monday, French lawmakers adopted a draft bill to simplify the return process. The current law requires every looted item in the national collection to be voted on individually. But the bill has faced political wrangling. The far left wants its scope extended. The far right wants to limit restitution only to states that have so-called cordial relations with France. There is precedent for this type of law. In 2023, France adopted 2 laws to return objects looted from Jewish families during World War II and human remains from public collections.
Well, for more, we're joined in studio now by historian Marie Cécile Zinsou, president of the Zinsou Fondation, a contemporary art museum in Benin. Thanks so much for coming into studio and speaking with us this evening, Marie Cécile. Firstly, how significant is the legislation that was discussed in the French Parliament this week? And do votes like this contribute to the wider debate here when it comes to these artworks that are being increasingly repatriated back to their African countries of origin?
Today is a historical day. It's a historical day because we've been waiting for that since the Ouagadougou speech of Emmanuel Macron, who opened a dream. Because for the moment, all the heritage was blocked in France. There was no way African countries could get their heritage back. So we've been waiting for 9 years since Ouagadougou and 66 years since the independence for the Benin example. So it's very important. Today it changes the relationship between France and the African continent. So for a young generation who has been totally out of their heritage, of their history, it's the way heritage is going to come back, and the youth is going to be exposed for the first time to the objects and to all this looted art that makes our identity. So it's a very symbolical law for us, but not only symbolical, it will have, I hope, very important effects in the few next years.
Not just symbolic, as you say, because do you think that this kind of thing, it can help, repair historical injustices? And in your view, is this kind of repatriation more about a moral obligation or a legal one?
It's a moral obligation in the 21st century to give back looted objects, when in the specific case of the continent, I don't like to make generality, but for the African continent, more than 90% of the art has been looted during colonization, which means the majority of our culture is held in European countries and Western world. So for Africa, it's so important this time that France has accepted to change the nature of the discussions. We've had what's been called France-Afrique since the independence, and this very twisted relationship between the continent and France. And so it's the first time we have a respect. We can look in each other's eye on the same level. So France is admitting its colonial past, even if it doesn't speak about colonization. colonization in the text because it wants to be more universal than that. But obviously, African countries are the ones that are that have been targeted by this law. So it's not only objects coming back; it's pride, it's history, and it's respect. And respect has been lacking this relationship for the last decades. So that's why it has so much importance to our eyes in Benin, and I think more largely in all the continents.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, what does the return of these artefacts mean for national identity, for cultural revival in some of these African countries?
It's something that you don't realize if you live in Paris, if you live in London or in Berlin. If you live in an area where you can have all the culture of the world, all the museums, all the artifacts, all the books you want, you don't realize what it is to live in a country where everything that is making your culture, everything that tells your history is 5,000 kilometers away in a place where you will never go. And even if you tried, you will never get a visa. So it's difficult to understand how you create your identity and how you imagine your future if you don't know your history. Because colonization has done something that is hard to measure, but that is very impactful today. It has erased our history. And if colonization has told another story, and then you don't have any museum where you can go and see the proof of what your kingdom has been, of what your history has done. Well, then you are inferior in your head. That's a very big problem. Colonization has created inferiority and has deprived us from our history. So today it's a hope that this history is coming back, and after we'll do what we want with our history, but I mean we will be able to see where we want to bring our future.
And Marie Cécile, what concerns do European museums have about all of this? How do they actually justify retaining these artworks and this cultural heritage?
It's a law. It's a French law that has been existing to protect the French heritage. It's today the artworks, objects in the museum are the French people's heritage. So the law has been made to protect this heritage and to stop the king from giving away the objects or to stop people from stealing them. So it's really a law to protect the French people's heritage. So you understand why the law has been created. But then when you speak about looted artifacts, there it becomes complicated. And so, yeah, it was so important that we had a special law to be able to look at this time of colonization. Yes, we were French, so all the heritage has been taken and brought to France, which was legal. But if you look at the history in the beginning of the 21st century, you can't tell the use of a whole continent. Sorry, your ancestors have lost the war in 1892 for Benin, so you will never have history anymore.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, how do you even define that kind of ownership when we're talking about cultural heritage that was taken so long ago during a colonial era?
It's so long ago and it's very recent. It's my great-grandfather was the one who saw the objects leaving, and I'm the one seeing them coming back. So it's not a very long period of time. We have the question of the provenance. In some case, you can really explain where the objects are from and what are their history. In the Benin case, which is my case, so it's more easy to explain, a lot of objects come from the royal palace, and the way they have been looted is very documented. So that's why France made an exception law for Benin, and that's how Benin already has 26 royal artifacts that came back. For some objects, you don't know. You don't know the way it's been taken. You don't know the period it has been taken, by whom. It's complex. So French museum and European museums, there is a European program now to understand to try to understand the provenance. Where do these objects come from? So French museum, European museums, they're working now to understand the history of their collection, and they've never looked into it. So now they have to look into it, and after they can make proper decision and create collaboration with the origin countries, because there was no dialogue between African museum and European museum. it's not only restitution of objects, it's also a dialogue, it's also new ways of understanding the common heritage, because all these objects have a common history too. And we can't erase that. So everything has to be documented, but it has to be done in a dialogue. So dialogue means respect, and respect is very new in this relationship between France and the continent.
And what happens in those cases? Because you say, it can be complex if you don't know where these objects are actually from, if they're incomplete records and no documentation. What actually happens in those specific cases?
In most of the borders, they've been drawn in Berlin in 1884, 1885. So we know where the objects have been collected. So the question is is the country that is asking them the owner? And that is a difficult question. And you have to do really specific inquiries on every object, because an object that has been taken in the border of Mali, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire, and if it's a pearl object of a population that will migrate through the borders, which country can ask it? It's a question is that all the museums will have to look into the history. They will have to go on the ground. They will have to go to the countries, discuss with people there, and try to understand. In the Musée du Quai Branly, most of the art historians have come to Benin and have documented the objects with the local population, and they have been in contact with our reality and our history, because a lot of knowledge is kept by us. We don't have the objects, but we still have the knowledge, and so everything has to be searched and inquired. It's gonna be interesting times for Africa and Europe.
And is there any country here in Europe that's leading the way, so to speak? We're talking about it in France this week, but it's obviously a huge issue for the UK as well.
What happened in 2017 with the Ouagadougou speech was major, because you can really date it. You can date it. It's November 2017. Emmanuel Macron says Africa's heritage has to go back. So it's really a French dynamic. But then the European situation is very interesting. UK has not made any law for restitution, but if you look in numbers, UK is probably the country that has brought back the most objects on the African continent, because the private institution, for example, Cambridge, they have the Cambridge Museum, has sent 72 Benin bronze back to Nigeria. So UK today is not the country that is most innovative in terms of law, but they have given back, and they've been very quick. They've given back very soon after the Ouagadougou speech. Germany has not made a federal law, but museums are doing cooperation and are quite active. And Belgium has given back the property of the object to Congo, but they have never restituted one object. So you see, every European country has a different approach. And then every African country has a different approach, because we asked for 26 objects of the royal treasure in Benin, but then some countries like Gabon didn't ask anything, because they thought that they have a lot of collections in their country, and that the collections they have elsewhere can link their diaspora to their heritage. So at one point now they're asking restitution, but for the last 5 years they didn't ask any restitution, feeling that the object would connect them with the diaspora and the people who didn't know Gabon. So you see, everyone has a different approach today in Europe and in Africa.
It's a very complex but very interesting topic. Thanks so much for coming into studio to speak with us about it, Marie Cécile. We do appreciate your time. That is Marie Cécile Zinsou, President of the Zinsou Fondation.